Hello everyone. Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology 1. Today we're going to go over the first module. This is an introduction to the human body. In this module, we're going to provide definitions for anatomy and physiology. We're going to talk about the different types of anatomy, the different types of physiology, and then we're going to complement that with terminology to describe location, position, and orientation of the human body. Now, every lecture or every PowerPoint file is going to have a slide with learning objectives. This is sort of like your study guide for the module. I'm not going to be reading these learning objectives for you, but I strongly recommend that in preparation for the exams, you go over these learning objectives to make sure that you know everything that you're supposed to know from each module. Now let's define anatomy and let's define physiology. We define anatomy as the study of structures of the body and their relationships to each other. Anatomy is what's there. Anatomy, basically, it's looking at a feature of the body and describing it or understanding it in terms of its position, its form or its shape, whether it's connected to other features, other organs, okay? So it's fairly simple in its definition. It's also, we have here that this is the oldest medical science, right? Humans have been dissecting human cadavers and also animals to understand the different organs and different organ systems. We define physiology as the study of the functions of the body parts and how they work to carry out their life-sustaining activities. Physiology is what it does. You look at an anatomical feature and you're thinking in terms of what does this do, right? What is the function of it? How does it work? We also have here that anatomy dictates physiology, and then physiology dictates anatomy. And this is a recurring theme in biology. You will quite often hear biologists say that form and function go together. A good example of this is when we look at, let's say, adaptations in the animal world. You look at an eagle, and you look at the feet of the eagle, and you see these very powerful, sharp claws, right? And you immediately associate that with the function that those structures have, right? Yes, to capture and to kill prey. Here we have another good example of anatomy and physiology or form and function going together. When we look at our teeth in humans, given that humans are mammals, we have a lot of complexity in our teeth. We have different kinds of teeth. If you look, for example, at the incisor teeth at the very front, right, and you look at the shape, at the anatomy of it, then it kind of looks like a blade, right? And that's related to its function. That blade is used for cutting. In this case, we see a picture of a lady biting a carrot, right? Cutting that carrot with the incisor teeth. When you look at molar teeth, or you look at a molar tooth, right? You see that it has a very different anatomy, a very different shape. It has a bulgy, irregular shape, and this is ideal for grinding food. So we see here, with a very simple example, how we have two different types of teeth that have very different anatomies or very different shapes, right? But at the end of the day, these shapes that they have correspond with the actual functions. They have different functions. Now, when we think in terms of the types of anatomy that we have, then we have what we call gross anatomy. And this is when we study anatomy without a microscope. We can do dissections and study where the organs are located and the relative size of organs and the relative position of different organs, right? So that would be gross anatomy, as long as we're not using microscopes. And then we have microscopic anatomy, and this is when we study anatomy with microscopes. And this is when we study structures that are too small for us to see with our naked eyes. For example, when we study cells, or when we study different types of tissues, right? We need microscopes to do that. Now, when it comes to physiology, we have different types of physiology. We have, for example, molecular physiology, studying the function of individual molecules. Proteins, for example. You have thousands of different proteins in your body that have different functions. Protein function is related to protein shape, right? So even at the molecular level, this whole idea of form and function going together, we still observe that. We have also systemic physiology, studying the function of individual organ systems, right? Like in people that specialize in studying organ systems, well, the specialty has a name. Like, for example, when it comes to doctors, medical doctors, if it's someone that studies the digestive systems, where, yeah, gastroenterologist, uh, just to give you an example. We have cellular physiology, studying the function of individual cells. And then we have pathophysiology, very closely related to medicine, studying how diseases and aging alter the physiology or the function of organ systems and organs. Here in this slide, we have the different levels of organization in life. And if we start at the smallest level, then we have atoms. Atoms are the fundamental units of matter. We have atoms of different elements like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. Those four, by the way, are the most important in life in terms of amount of mass. You know, your body mass, 96% of your body mass is going to be those four different elements. So elements of different atoms come together to form molecules. Molecules that we can classify in biology into different categories like proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, for example. Above the level of the molecule, we see here a cellular organelle. We specifically see a mitochondrion. Mitochondria, as you already know, as you probably should already know, is the powerhouse of the cell. This is where cellular respiration occurs, where ATP is produced. ATP is a molecule that acts as the energy currency of life. The vast majority of cellular processes are powered by ATP. Now, going above the level of the organelle, then we have the level of a cell, and we have specifically here a smooth muscle cell. Okay? Cells come together to form tissues. So this smooth muscle cell comes together with other muscle cells to produce smooth muscle tissue. In the next module, this is what we're going to study. We're going to study the different kinds of tissue. It's an area that we call histology. Now we have tissues of different kinds that come together to form an organ. In this case, that organ is a blood vessel. And organs come together to form an organ system. In this case, we're looking at the circulatory system. And then we have different organ systems that come together to form an organism or an individual. The different organ systems that make up the human body, they have different functions to be able to maintain life. They do not work in isolation. As a matter of fact, different organ systems cooperate with each other, or they work together with each other to be able to maintain life. When we look at the different functions for life, we have different categories. So here, for example, we can start with separation. Separation of internal and external environments is necessary. And we can have separation at different levels. Like if you look at the cellular level, for example, the plasma membrane, that's the boundary between the external environment of the cell and the internal environment of the cell. You probably studied the structure of the plasma membrane in a previous biology course. You probably know that the plasma membrane, the main fabric, is a molecule that we call phospholipid. Plasma membranes are made up of a phospholipid bilayer, which contains embedded proteins. So that's at the cellular level. For example, yes, we need the plasma membrane to separate the external environment of the cell from the internal environment of the cell. But when you look at the organismal level, then we have the skin. The skin separates the body's internal environment from the external environment. The skin is a very important organ because it allows us to maintain water balance, to not lose liquid or lose water. It also is a barrier against potential pathogens, bacteria, and viruses that could produce a disease. Then another function for life here is movement. We have here that movement is necessary. Motility is when substances move through the body. We have, for example, cardiac muscle and smooth muscle do this, and we'll study muscle physiology later on in this class. And then we have locomotion is when whole body parts move, right? When you get up and you start walking around, that would be locomotion. And you need skeletal muscles to do that together with your skeleton, with your bones, which provides structural support for your body. Your muscles, as we will see, are attached to bones. So yes, bones produce a structure that supports your body, but also allows for locomotion by muscles contracting and relaxing. We have here that living things respond to stimuli. And this is actually one of the defining properties of life. We have here that stimuli are changes in the internal or external environment, and once they are detected, reactions occur to address them. Other functions for life here: digestion and absorption. Digestion is breaking down ingested substances, right? When you eat, you're going to put food in your mouth. You're going to mechanically break down that food in your mouth by chewing. Then you're going to swallow, and then you're going to chemically digest the food. You're going to take the large biomolecules in the food. They're chemically broken down to produce smaller molecules, and also to basically transfer the energy, the chemical energy from the food into cellular processes that end up producing ATP, which ends up powering your cells and basically all biological work, or most of the biological work. We have metabolism. And I know that when we hear the word metabolism, we're thinking in terms of burning calories, for example. Like if you hear someone say, hey, I have a fast metabolism, you're probably going to interpret that as oh, this is someone who can lose weight fairly quickly because they can burn calories quickly. But the technical definition of what metabolism is what we have here on this slide, is the sum of all the chemical reactions that keep an organism alive. So it's the collection of basically all the chemical reactions that you see inside cells. Chemical reactions that are typically linked with each other, forming what we call metabolic pathways. I already mentioned earlier in this lecture a metabolic pathway. I mentioned cellular respiration occurring in mitochondria. That's one of the most important metabolic pathways in the chemistry of life. It's a long, complicated metabolic pathway that links many different chemical reactions together. Now, metabolic pathways can be classified into two kinds. We have catabolic pathways, or what we call catabolism. These are the reactions that break down larger molecules and release energy. And then we have anabolic pathways, or anabolism, the reactions that build larger molecules from smaller molecules, and this requires energy. Then another function of life that we see here is excretion. And this is simply getting rid of waste products like feces, urine, and even carbon dioxide as you exhale. These are all waste products that need to leave the body, and we have different organs and organ systems that are in charge of doing this for us. Then we have growth and repair. growth is an increase in the size or number of cells. Yeah, so when we're born and we're babies and we have cell division and differentiation and development that allows us to grow. But even once we're fully adults, we still need cell division to occur for the purpose of repairing and replenishing uh, liquids like blood, for example. Like, your blood needs to be replenished continuously, as well as many other solutions in the body. We have here reproduction. And reproduction is the production of offspring. It is not vital to individual organisms to reproduce. Obviously, you don't have to reproduce to stay alive, right? But it is vital for species to reproduce, right? Obviously, if individuals lose their capability of reproducing, let's say every individual in a population of a species loses its ability to reproduce, then that species is going to go extinct. And then finally, we have here homeostasis. And this is perhaps the function for life that we're going to emphasize the most in this course, in the subject of anatomy and physiology. And we have here that homeostasis is the maintenance of stable internal conditions. So yeah, this is a central principle of physiology. So let's elaborate on homeostasis. So we have here a more extended definition as a relative constant set of internal conditions that stay the same even when external conditions change. Homeostasis is dynamic, meaning it changes to keep things in balance. All the body's organ systems work together to maintain homeostasis. And then finally, we have here that homeostasis is maintained using negative and positive feedback loops. And we're going to talk about these two. But a good example of homeostasis is temperature, body temperature. And let's move to the next slide to talk about this one. And temperature, your body temperature, is regulated by negative feedback loops. Okay. The normal body temperature, your body temperature is not constant. It fluctuates, but it fluctuates in a fairly narrow range. Your optimal body temperature is around 37 degrees Celsius or close to 98 degrees Fahrenheit. All right. Obviously, your body temperature can drop, and it can drop significantly if you have, for example, a hypothermia, and this could be life-threatening. Or your body temperature can increase significantly, like when you run a fever. And a very high fever is also a life-threatening condition. But otherwise, your body temperature is relatively stable, staying fairly close to its optimal of, like I said, around 37 degrees Celsius. So how is that maintained, that body temperature, considering how much the temperature of the air fluctuates? All right. And we have air temperature fluctuations during the day. So at nighttime, for example, obviously the temperature drops significantly. At noon is typically when the temperature is highest. But then throughout the year, right, with the different seasons, winter, for example, when the temperatures can drop to very low levels. Summer, yeah, it can get really hot. Okay, so how do we maintain a body temperature in such a narrow range, given the external fluctuations in air temperature? Well, if you look at the diagram that we have here, let's say that it gets cold, okay? Or you go outside and it is cold, and your body temperature starts dropping. Well, you have these receptors, these temperature-sensitive cells in the skin and the brain, yeah, that are going to detect that drop in body temperature. This information is sent to a control center, the thermoregulatory center in the brain. And then basically this is going to send a signal to effectors that are going to produce a response. In this case, the effectors are skeletal muscles. You're going to start shivering, and so your skeletal muscles are going to contract and relax rapidly, and this is going to help increase your body temperature back to normal or back to the optimum. Now, let's say that the stimulus is actually heat. You go outside and it gets really hot and your body temperature starts rising. Then the same receptors in your skin and the brain are going to sense that increase in body temperature. The control center in your brain is going to send signals to the effectors. The effectors in this case are going to be sweat glands. You're going to start sweating, and then you're going to cool down by evaporative cooling. So there we go. Temperature is a great example for illustrating how homeostasis works. But we have many others. Water balance, for example. You have to maintain a certain water balance. Or maybe the pH in your blood. Your pH in your blood is tightly regulated through different chemical mechanisms. So those are negative feedback loops. And these are the most common ones. Now for positive feedback loops, in this case, the goal is to create a new temporary set point. The response increases the effect of the stimulus. So these are rare. They don't happen very often. I have a few examples here. And the example that we have in the diagram is labor and delivery. So if a pregnant woman is ready for delivery, the baby starts pushing on the cervix, causing it to stretch. Stretching of the cervix causes nerve impulses to be sent to the brain. The brain starts producing oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone, so it's a signaling molecule. And oxytocin is going to cause smooth muscle lining of the uterus to contract. It's going to contract, and then the baby's going to push more, and then it's the signal that the stimulus reinforces the response. All right, this is something that I mentioned earlier, and that is that the organ systems, they don't work in isolation. They actually interact and cooperate with each other. And this is a great example. In this case, where we have the digestive system, the respiratory system, the urinary system, the cardiovascular system, and the integumentary systems. So we have 5 different organ systems working together for the purpose of respiration. And when I say respiration, not just breathing, but cellular respiration and chemically digesting food items and producing ATP, transferring energy, chemical energy to a molecule that we call ATP. Okay? And just real quick, right? The chemical energy for producing ATP through cellular respiration is going to come from food. So you're going to ingest food. That food is going to enter the digestive system. It's going to be chemically broken down as it moves through your digestive system. The nutrients obtained from digesting food are going to move now into the cardiovascular system. So you're going to have nutrients now in your blood, things like glucose, for example, blood sugar, right? And these food molecules, like glucose, they're going to be transported to cells, into mitochondria for the purpose of cellular respiration to produce ATP. But you're probably aware of the fact that for cellular respiration to occur, you need oxygen, right? So when we breathe in air, it's because we want to take the oxygen from the air, right? So there's gas exchange between the respiratory system and the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system. The oxygen is going to move from your lungs into your bloodstream. And then you probably already know also that a byproduct or a waste product of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide. So that has to move in the opposite direction, from your bloodstream to your lungs as you exhale air, you're trying to get rid of the carbon dioxide, right? I'm not going to mention the other organ systems. I'm not going to give you a full explanation right now, but it's explained here in the uh, slide. Okay. Now we have 11 different organ systems. Not all of them we're going to be able to study in A&P1. As a matter of fact, in this course, we're only going to study the first 4 of them: the integumentary system, the muscular system, the skeletal system, and then the nervous system. The remaining systems are going to be topics for the second course in anatomy and physiology. Now here we have an activity that in which you can go ahead and match the description to the different organ systems. And the way it's numbered already, I mean, you can match it directly, right? So number 1, we have here the external body covering that makes vitamin D and has receptors and glands. Well, that's the integumentary system. Or number 2, the muscular system, the system that enables movement, maintains posture, and generates heat. Right? Number 3, the skeletal system, the system that protects and supports organs and provides a framework for muscle attachment. So this is just mentioning that the general features and the most important functions of all 11 organ systems. And even though I told you that in this course we're only going to be studying the first 4 in detail, that is, I still want you to know this slide. Okay, I want you to know the 11 organ systems and their general functions. Okay, moving on, we have here, the next few slides are going to be about body cavities, locations of different structures in the body, basically the terminology that we use for describing location and orientation. And I mean, there's different conventions in terms for doing this. We start with body cavities, okay? We have here that all of the body's organs are found inside cavities. Cavities provide protection to the organs inside them. And not just that, they also isolate different organs from each other, all right? For example, the thoracic cavity might have a chemical and physical environment that might be very different from the abdominal cavity. So we need in some cases at least some separation between different cavities or organs in different cavities. Okay. We have here that cavities can be closed or open. Closed cavities are seen on the image. And then open cavities, well, those are easier, right? Every opening that we have in our body to the external world or the external environment, the oral cavity, the digestive cavity, the nasal cavity, the orbital cavities or our eyes, the external ear, right? Now, when we look at the closed cavities, first we can classify them into dorsal cavities and then ventral cavities. And for dorsal cavities, basically those that are on your back side. And for dorsal cavities, we have cranial and vertebral cavities. The question here, what do they protect? Fairly obvious. The brain and the spine or vertebral column. And then we have the ventral cavities, for which we have the thoracic, the abdominal, and the pelvic cavity. And then these ventral cavities protect the visceral organs, like your heart, your lungs, your liver, your kidneys. Okay? But we can see also here that some of these cavities, or at least that thoracic cavity, can also be subdivided. For example, we have the pleural cavity, we have the pericardial cavity. You know, these are all cavities within the thoracic cavity. Here we have terminology that is also very useful for describing the position of different organs, or maybe describing the position of where a patient is suffering pain. So this is basically dividing the abdominopelvic cavity into 4 quadrants, okay? Notice that we're combining the abdominal with the pelvic cavity into just one thing, okay? So we have the right upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, the left upper quadrant, the left lower quadrant, okay? The important thing here, and this is what confuses some people, is to make sure that you understand that the frame of reference here is the patient, okay? Like if a patient is facing you, and we're thinking in terms of the left upper quadrant, given that the patient is the frame of reference, it's the left side of the patient. And notice that the left upper quadrant is going to be on our right side, on our right field of view, okay? So it's not whether a quadrant is on your left side or right side in terms of your field of view, it's the patient being used as your frame of reference, okay? Now, I don't have the organs listed here for the 4 quadrants, and I would like you guys to basically find out this information yourself. So the main organs, just you can Google this. Hey, the main organs and the abdominal and the pelvic cavity, things like the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder, the stomach, the large intestine, the small intestine, the urinary bladder, the kidneys. Describe the, or simply Google those and place those different organs into the 4 quadrants that we see here. Okay. Now here in the next slide, here we have regional terms. There's a lot of terminology in this slide, and we do want you guys to learn it all. Okay. So this is simply to describe the different areas of the body. We have, for example, cephalic. Cephalic refers to the head, but even in the head, we can be a little more specific. We can say the frontal area, right? Where your forehead is. Your orbital area, where your eyes are located. Nasal for the nose, your oral for the mouth, right? The cervical area. Cervical area is for the neck. Thoracic for your chest, and so on. We have a lot of terminology, some of which you might already be familiar with, and some of it is going to be new to you, okay? So I'm not going to read the whole terminology here, but this is a slide that you're going to have to study to memorize all this terminology. Once you have learned all the regional terms, then make sure you practice it. Test your knowledge. This slide, for example, is asking you, we have a model and we have arrows or axes located on the model, and then with the question, which region is this? So you should be able to answer all of these, answer all of the ones that are listed in the previous slide. Now moving on, we have directional terms. So directional terms help to describe the location of body structures compared to one another. So this is for the relative position of organs, okay, or anatomical features or structures. Directional terms always come in pairs. Directional terms are based on the body in what we call standard anatomical position. So if you see these individuals here, the 2 pictures that we have, and we focus on the individual on the left, which is facing us, that's what we call standard anatomical position. The body is erect, the palms are facing forward, the feet are slightly separated. So some of the terminology that we saw in the previous slide. Superior versus inferior. Superior, above. Inferior, below. So we say, for example, hey, the head is superior to the shoulders, right? Or we could also say the shoulders are inferior to the head, right? Again, this is for relative position. So a structure relative to another one. Then we have left versus right. And I already told you that you have to be careful with this one because it has nothing to do with your field of view. The Patient is always the frame of reference. You have to think in terms of the left side of the patient or the right side of the patient. We have lateral versus medial. Location, this is location relative to the midline of the body. Lateral is farther from the midline. Medial is closer to the midline. So we could say, for example, the shoulders are lateral compared to, let's say, your sternum. Your sternum is medial compared to your shoulders. Then we have proximal versus distal. And these are for the arms and the legs, okay? Proximal, closer to the attachment point on the body. Distal, farther from the attachment point. Like if I look at my arms and I look at my hands, for example, I can say that my hands are distal relative to my elbows, but my elbows are distal relative to my shoulders. Or if I go in opposite direction, I could say my shoulders are proximal relative to my elbows are proximal relative to my hands or my fingers. Then we have anterior versus posterior. Anterior is closer to the front, what's on the front side, posterior closer to the back. By the way, in humans, because we walk upright, anterior and ventral are synonymous. It's the same thing. The anterior side or the ventral side is the same thing. Posterior, dorsal is also the same thing, right? But that only works for humans that walk, when we walk upright. Because if you're thinking in terms of an animal like a dog, for example, the anterior portion is closer to the head, whereas the ventral is the underside. The posterior portion of a dog is where the tail is, all right, or towards the tail. The dorsal area is the whole back of the dog, just to give you an example here. We have another example here of putting this information to practice. So this is a slide for you. You can fill this up, and then you can, if you have questions, let your instructor know or let one of the TAs know. Then we have planes here. And planes or sections, body planes or sections, okay? If you have, for example, a mid-sagittal section, you can see it here in the diagram. This is cutting an individual and dividing that individual into left, right. Right? Left and right sections are created. A frontal section divides the body, is one that divides the body in anterior, posterior regions or sections. And then when you have a transverse section, that's dividing the body in superior, inferior. And this terminology is very important for the purposes of imaging techniques, like when you get x-rays or a CT scan or a PET scan. A doctor is going to write, hey, do a transverse section at this level, or do a frontal section or a mid-sagittal section in this area. Okay, so this is terminology that it's very important in medicine. We have it repeated here in this slide, but also terminology that we can use interchangeably. So we use mid-sagittal in the previous slide, but that's also synonymous with median. Or we use frontal, but that's also synonymous with coronal. And then we also have an additional plane here on your far right, the diagram on your far right, the oblique plane. And that's sort of like creating a plane or a section at an angle. The last couple slides that we have here, last 2 or 3 slides on this PowerPoint presentation, are somewhat redundant with the ones that we saw, that we just completed. They provide maybe a little more additional information in the text associated to these slides with new diagrams for these different planes. But they're not really presenting any additional new information. So this is where we're going to stop.